Okay, we have two more tests to explore here. And notice now that we're under a different category. Now we're going to look at projective tests. Okay, so projective tests are no longer going to be relying on self-report. Okay, in fact, when we use a projective test, we are looking for unconscious influences. Remember that focus from the psychodynamic approach, right? Of the unconscious kinds of influences on our personality. So when we use a projective test, we can't ask people, what's affecting your personality if they don't know about it. We're going to have to use a more undercover, incognito kind of test. And so what I'm going to do is to show you the two of them that are the most reliable and valid for the projective tests. Okay. And so if we're looking for unconscious influences, and you're going to see that this first one, the Rorschach test, okay, is the most valid and reliable overall of the projective tests. That's for the general population. But there's a certain group of individuals for which another test is actually more reliable and valid under this projective category. And we'll get to that next. So the Rorschach test is a very well-known one. You might know of it by the more common name of the ink blot test. Okay. So the ink blot test is super interesting. Let me see. I'm going to get a card here and show you something because you can do this at home, right? Yes, you can do this at home. If you could make your own Rorschach test by using an index card this size or bigger, okay? And what you would do is you would spill ink, okay, on one side of this card. You'd spill ink on it, and then you would press it together, close it in half, press it together, open it back up, lay it out somewhere to dry. Okay, you would do this to a series of cards. Now, remember that game that you played when you were a kid? And you would lay down on the ground and you'd all look up at the clouds and you would be saying, I see this and I see that. And everybody would see something different in these clouds because clouds are a very abstract shape. Okay? And that is the idea. That is why you're using spilt ink in this case. Now, why do you think that it's only spilled on one side and then pressed like this? Okay? And if you're thinking you want it to be somewhat symmetrical, that is true. It's not going to be perfectly symmetrical, but neither are things in life. Even your face is not perfectly symmetrical. If you don't believe me, then take a photo of yourself straight on, pull it into a program like Paint where you can split it in half, right down the center, and get rid of one half, take the other half, and reverse it, and put it on the other side, and it's going to look different than you. Okay, so the idea here, though, is that a lot of things in life are somewhat symmetrical. And so if you have an abstract design that is somewhat symmetrical, it's easier for people to see something in it. Okay, now when you give this test, okay, the trick is you want to get the respondent replying as quickly as possible. So when we talk about things in the unconscious, we're going to study that more under the psychodynamic approach. But there sometimes can be defenses, where the person themselves is being protected from certain information. And you don't want that censorship coming into play. In other words, the faster that you can get them to respond, okay, the first thing that comes into their mind is what you want to know, not what they've thought over carefully and then decided to give as an answer. Okay. So you're going to, how this is administered is the cards are shown to a client one at a time, asking them for what they see. Now, what do you think that the psychologist is looking for in these answers to what they saw? Okay. And what they're looking for are reoccurring themes. So basically, when there's something in our unconscious and we're not aware of it, we can't confront it logically. We can't keep it at bay. We can't criticize it. In other words, it can have a larger influence on our life than things that we are conscious of. Okay, so it can come out in many different ways, and over a series of many cards. The idea is that maybe we'll have a reoccurring theme here and a clue as to if there is something unconscious that is having an effect here. Okay, this is my favorite picture of a psychologist giving a child the Rorschach test. And I'll tell you why it's my favorite. Take a look at that picture. What do you think this little girl, her answer was? What did she see in that? Well, she gave this answer: upside down cowboy legs. You see it? It's so cute. Hey. Okay, so overall, the Rorschach test is the most valid and most reliable for projective tests overall, for the population overall. However, for a select group of individuals, those in particular who really enjoy expressing themselves with creative writing, the TAT, which stands for Thematic Apperception Test, TAT, is more reliable or more valid just for that select group of individuals. And the idea here is that if you were to be given this test, you'd be brought into a quiet space, maybe a room, where you're alone with the table, and sat down, and somebody would bring you a picture, a different picture, every, say, maybe 15 minutes, and your task would be to write a short story around that picture. And the pictures that come with the thematic apperception test are particularly thoughtful pictures. I'm going to show you an example of one here. Okay. So people can come up with some really interesting stories that they write about with the TAT short stories. And again, the psychologist is going to look for reoccurring themes. But they also can look a little bit further when we get to the TAT, because the truth of the matter is, when we write short stories, we tend to model the heroes or the main characters of the stories after ourselves. And sometimes there's villains in the story that are kind of common, have some kind of common role maybe. Okay, and sometimes you can figure out, what kind of person might be a difficulty in this person's life unconsciously, through this kind of a test. Okay, you might find out, for instance, that the villains in the story tend to be, oftentimes be the mother, just as an example there. All right. So you've become familiar now with with 5 different tests. And remember that I said that the projective test, the Rorschach, I was going to show you the 2 that had the highest validity and reliability for projective tests. Okay, and that's important. It's an important qualifier because overall, the projective tests have much lower validity and reliability statistics than do the self-report measures. So they're not nearly as high as the self-report measures. However, I gave you the 2 highest rating ones. You might say, well, if they're that much different in their validity and reliability from self-report, why do psychologists use them? Okay. Well, I'll tell you something. Psychoanalysts, therapists who work from a psychodynamic viewpoint, really swear by them. And if you read up on this, this kind of debate, why is it that they still use them? Why? What appears to be the case is that regardless of whether they are helpful or not in tapping into unconscious influences for a particular client, overall they really tend to, psychoanalysts tend to feel that they Their likely value is in that they really can help to give the client insight, the therapist insight, and really help the two of them to build a relationship. Okay, so when are you going to use a projective test? When you're looking for unconscious influences. When are you going to use a self-report test? When you're looking for conscious influences, right? So those are the two main categories. And now let me test you. I want to see if you can answer these questions now about which test to use without looking at your notes. Hey, there are only 5 of them, so let's see if you can do this. What if you want to find the best person for the job? Which test are you going to use? Hey, and if you thought the 16PF questionnaire, you are right. Hey. How about if you want to do research to see if certain personalities are more likely to be vulnerable to heart disease? By the way, type A personality is certainly has a more vulnerable component, and we're going to be looking at that when we look at the trait approach. But what kind of test would you use for this? Okay. And the correct answer is the NEO personality inventory. Remember, that's used for a normal population, like our class assignment. When we're just doing research to look, at differences, individual differences between people that predict different behaviors. Okay. What if you want to see if your client has an unconscious fear of something? What if you have a theory about that? What might you use? Okay. Well, there's 2 possible answers to that, right? Depending on your client. So if the answer you came up with is a Rorschach test, that is true. Overall, that is most likely what you're going to be using. And what is the exception? All right, so if your client happens to be somebody who really enjoys expressing themselves with creative writing, then the TIT is even better for this purpose. Okay. What if you want to see if your client is suffering from depression, kind of get a clue of maybe that might be the case? Okay. And the answer to that one is the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. Great. All right, couple of things to wrap up here. So for our next class, so when you start the next lecture segments, before you start them, you are going to want to go to our Blackboard site on the class and look under the self-assessment questionnaires. If you haven't already done all of them, some of you have, that's great. But either way, you're going to want to have these 2 questionnaires, 1 and 2, filled out before you start the next lecture segments. That will be the psychodynamic approach, okay? And those segments will cover the psychodynamic approach. Those 2 questionnaires, you want to have them filled out and scored because you will get a chance and opportunity to learn what it was you tested yourself for and to interpret your scores on that. A very fun part of this class. Okay, so coming up, our next lecture segments we'll be looking at the psychodynamic approach. Okay, unconscious influences, things that can affect your personality without your being aware of them.